Hi students, today we're going to talk about developing merchandising plans, chapter 14. This is a really important chapter, and so if I was studying for the final exams, I would spend a lot of time on chapter 14. So having said that, let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 14 really begins talking about merchandising philosophies and how retailers decide what merchandise to carry. Now, some of this is determined by how retailers classify themselves as to what types of goods they should carry. But obviously, as with most things in retailing, all decisions begin with who is the target audience. And so once we decide that, there are a lot of other slides talking about different factors that help us make decisions in terms of what products we're going to carry, who the competition is, what our image is. All of those things are important in making these decisions, but obviously the most important is who's the target audience. So once we've decided that, that helps to kind of dictate our merchandising philosophy. You need to understand the difference between the merchandising and also the buyer and what kind of functions they perform. And then they also talk a little bit about the different types of products. You've got staple, fad, and fashion, and this kind of thing. And so when we talk about staple merchandise, depending on the type of retailer, staple merchandise is different. Staple merchandise is what we should have on hand. These are things we never want to run out of. These are things that customers expect us to have when they come by the very nature of the business we're in. I know my husband and I went out to dinner once at a rib joint and they were out of ribs. Right? That's a huge merchandising problem when that's what you do. You sell ribs. Right? If you ever gone to an ice cream parlor and they're out of chocolate ice cream, come on guys, right? That's staple. Right? These are things you're expected to have, you can never run out of. And so those are the kind of things to think about when you're setting up your inventory and when you're setting up your merchandise plan. Right. Some other concepts in this chapter, we talked about the retail life cycle in terms of introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. Retailers obviously go through these same kinds of steps just like products do. We've learned about that in other marketing classes. But retailers have an introductory phase and a growth phase, and that where their strategy would change appropriately. So it's important to understand how those changes would impact strategy. And then one of the really more important topics is the concept of width and depth in terms of assortment. And it's kind of hard to understand sometimes from the textbook alone. So the width of assortment really refers to the different types of product lines that we carry, how much choice I have in terms of selection. And then depth refers to how many different types of products the retailer carries. So a specific example might be my son drinks soy milk. So for a width of assortment might be the different types of milk that a retailer carries. Right? So if they have, if you go to a convenience store, you're probably not going to be able to choose between skim and 2% and whole. Right? They may only have one type, so their width of assortment is not very wide. Whereas you go to a grocery store, they will probably have 2% whole, right? The skim milk and different types of soy milk. So, right, then they have a width of assortment. Right? And then they have some depth, right? So depth refers to the variety of any one type of good. So we start focusing now on the soy milk example. My son asked me, did they sell chocolate soy milk? And so for the retailer that I was presently shopping at, they didn't, because they didn't have a deep assortment of soy milk products. Right? But if they did, then they might have not only soy milk, or if they had a wide assortment, they might have 2 or 3 different choices of soy milk. But then in terms of depth, they might have different flavors of soy milk, vanilla, strawberry, chocolate. They might have different sizes, right, of the soy milk. And so then that really refers to the depth. So different stores, and the slides go into different examples, will have a different width and depth of assortment based on their customers' desires. And then finally, the chapter ends up with a discussion about private versus manufacturer and generic brands. And this is really important change in kind of retailing history. Now it is very acceptable for consumers to use generic brands. Probably 20 years ago, you wouldn't want to be caught dead with a generic brand in your cart if one of your friends happened to see you in the store, because generic brands were simply these white and black boxes that said stuff like cereal. And that was it. Right? So they were very basic, and they weren't very exciting. In today's retail environment, generics have a whole different role. They are much more popular, they are much more acceptable, and consumers are constantly looking for alternatives to get more value and to pay a cheaper price. So today's generics aren't really generics at all. Now they're actually called private brands, right? And so this might be the retailer's brand as opposed to manufacturers. So if I'm a grocery store, manufacturers' brands might be, Kellogg's cereal versus Publix cereal. And this creates a real dichotomy for the retailer in terms of balancing relationships. Manufacturers' brands are important in drawing in customers because typically that's what gets them to come into the store. But private brands play an important role. They can sell those cheaper, so for customers who are looking for value, those types of products are very attractive, but also the retailer makes a lot more money on those private brands. And once I get you hooked on the Publix brand of dressing, guess what? You have to come back to Publix to buy that. So that helps to create loyalty, it helps to drive store traffic, and it creates more profits for the retailer. So that's why they want to do that. Now, they wouldn't want to totally get rid of manufacturers' brands because some consumers are brand loyal, and those are the kinds of things, the types of products that they really want to buy. So that really becomes important. So to understand kind of the balancing act that retailers have to play in terms of satisfying manufacturers, but also perhaps selling and promoting their own private label brands. And these are becoming very popular, not just in grocery stores, but you might recognize JCPenney's has their own brand of I think it's Arizona, and that's quite popular. And so these are growing in popularity and becoming very important in terms of retailer strategy. So I hope that helps you in terms of chapter 14. All right, happy studying.